Hey friends, welcome again to another soul session. I am excited for my guest today. His name is Imran and he'll share a lot more. But one of the things that I was thinking through is we've been thinking about the idea of change and how we go through that. And this is a person who has been to many different countries, had to start over, had to be, an author. And he's also done the thing that most people want. They've sold a company and brought a company to fruition and had an amazing exit. So we walk through what that means for him. How did he show up for his family in those times and what he's doing now? This is for those folks that truly want to hear it, something from that person who's achieved that success. And he's telling you that there was still more, that there's still more that he was yearning for, that it felt empty. And while he was grateful for all that he's achieved, now he can't stop. I'm one of the things that he shared a lot was, being deeply curious, which is, here in Soul Sessions, what we think through. And then the other is about how is it that he could be the steady person throughout the storm. I think you're going to enjoy this conversation. Let's jump in. All right, folks. Thank you again for joining us for Soul Sessions. I'm excited about this conversation because of what we've been trying to do, been showcasing inflection point. I'm grateful for my guests, and I'll turn it over to him. I'd love for you, Imran, to introduce yourself. And as like we like to say here, like, who are you without, the job title?
Hey, so excited to be here. First and foremost, I'm a son, I'm a husband, I'm a father, in those orders, and I think I'm a learner. So I think I've been brought on this world to just be curious, explore, and discover who I am in the process of going through a journey. And I think if I can leave it with making a few lives a bit richer, and however they define that, I'll be successful.
I love that. That is one of the themes, and I doubt you've listened to because this season hasn't come out yet. But one of the themes that's been coming up is curiosity. So I think you're in the right place. As we've been talking about inflection points, I'm sure you've had a couple stories. The first one that comes to mind, I'd love for you to just set up the scene for me. Talk to me about that inflection point in your life.
Yeah, I think the first inflection point in my life is losing consistency. And, I think when we think about our children or when we think about our careers, we're really intentionally trying to make a consistent outcome out of what we're doing. And I remember a period in my life when my family was migrating from Saudi Arabia to Canada. And I must have switched 4 or 5 schools in the span of 4 to 5 years. And it was a really pivotal time. I came to Canada and went into grade 5. Grade 5 was one school, grade 6 was another school, grade 7 I went to a different school, grade 8 I came back to the same school, grade 9 I went to a different high school. And it kind of forced me to very quickly build relationships and take solace in myself. And that's a really interesting lesson to learn at that age, where the one consistent piece is you and the person you're seeing in the mirror, right? And how you're showing up. And having to rapidly recreate relationships across these different, schooling systems until I got to high school and got some consistency. And I'm still very good friends with my high school friends today. Yeah. That was like the first inflection point. I went from this like very consistent environment of going to one school to a lot of change really rapidly, right? Yes. Amidst that schooling also was like my family was shifting, right? We were moving from, apartment to a different house to different places, all in the general same vicinity of Ontario or within Canada. But there was just a lot of change. And I think many kids could kind of cower on that stuff. That could be defining moments for them in terms of why they weren't able to have certain levels of confidence or have certain relationships or binding themes. But I really saw it as my superpower. I saw it as this ability to like morph and this ability to find the good in everything and taking inventory and everything that was around me and moving on to the next.
Yeah.
So
Oh,
that was the first big moment of inflection
yeah.
for me.
I have a couple follow up. So about grade five for folks, I think it's similar to the American system somewhat. Well, how old were you there? Thereabout.
Probably 10.
Okay. Yeah.
I moved to Canada in 1993. So, yeah, about 10 years old
Okay.
when I got there.
So about 10, and it's good enough to have like these strong memories. Coming from Saudi Arabia, we haven't checked. Do you have siblings? You're the only kid.
I
What's that
do.
like? Go ahead.
Yeah, I do. I'm really grateful. I've got three sisters and
Hmm.
one brother. I'm the second youngest in the group, and there's some age gap between my siblings, and so a lot of times they served as parental figures
Hmm.
for me as well. There was a period of time that after coming to Canada, my mom, my little sister, and my dad went back to Saudi Arabia, and so I was a 10-year-old being taken care of by my older siblings, which probably wouldn't fly today, but it did at that point, for better or for worse. And I know we talked a little bit about sports in the
Yeah.
beginning, but soccer was a big part of grounding me.
Mm.
And no matter where I went in that journey, and if I was ever sad, soccer was very consistent for me.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
there's a story of like in grade six, we moved to the countryside. My family came on a business visa, and so we ended up moving to the countryside. My dad had purchased a business, and um, I didn't have any friends at the school. And I remember going to where like the first graders and kindergarten kids would play, and they'd be playing soccer, and I would just sit there and watch, and it just made me feel like a consistent part of my past.
Yeah.
And I know it sounds really crazy. My little sister was in kindergarten, and I'm a seventh grader, and so I would go and check up on her, and um, I'd be watching these kids play soccer, and there was this one kid who I can't even remember his name, and he was so he was like a kindergartner or grade one, and he was saying, "Oh, you're new here," and I said, "Yeah, I'm new here," and he's like, "You haven't made any friends yet, your age," and I'm like, "No," and I just like soccer, and I like watching you kids play soccer, and it gives me joy. And then fast forward maybe 6 months, 9 months, I made some friends at that school, and I was playing with them, and the kid came up to me, and he's like, "See, I knew you'd make some friends," and
Yeah.
it was this heartwarming thing because you sometimes feel like the outsider. And Damon, in that school, I was the only person of my color,
Mm.
right? And so you definitely get into these situations where you feel like an outsider, and you have to kind of adapt and hang on to the things that are near and dear to you. And that's a great memory and fond memory of mine, where sports did that for me.
Yeah. Oh man, there's so much there. And so for the folks know, usually, because I consider, I guess maybe 1993 might be slightly different, but I consider Saudi Arabia to be, a more upcoming country. Uh, Am I safe to assume that the move to Canada was for better pastors of sort?
Yeah, especially education.
Okay.
I was really fortunate. I went to a fantastic school in Saudi Arabia, but I think beyond like the university level was very limited. And my father really strove for us to get educated and think in a very free and
Yeah.
progressive way. And the move was entirely driven by that.
Yeah, I love that. It's one of those things where even though, like the thing that's coming up for me is that even though we might move for a really good thing, we oftentimes don't think about how hard, or it's just hard for us to wrap our head out how hard a scenario might be, and where you had to move around a lot. In a sense, sometimes you were the only, and what I'm hearing is that there are things that you had from the past that you had to hold on. And we're going to come back to what you said earlier. I was like, how do you make yourself the constant? So someone's there because the folks probably don't even know your background fully yet. So we'll talk about that towards the end. Is there another inflection point that's coming up for you?
Yeah, I think in more recent years, um, exiting a company and, when I exited Instapage and um, took it to the promised land, as we say here in the Valley, and um, it was a really surreal feeling. I think like a lot of folks, I defined myself in my work. I was, uber passionate and obsessive to a degree, and then all of a sudden, you go from managing 150 people to nobody,
Mm.
right? And it's a surreal feeling, and it's strange, it's awkward, right? And um, it's something that you have to learn to move on to the next chapter about, that I don't think enough people really talk about, right? Like we really identify ourselves with our work, and um, I know I did. And after I reached that pinnacle of what should have made me very, very happy, there was this moment of like immense sort of loss and immense sort of letting go of something. And Damon, I worked really hard towards that exit, knowing I wouldn't be a part of the next chapter of that as well. And I still wanted the best outcome for as many people as I could make the best outcome for. And that was really interesting, because you had to learn to go from managing many to managing yourself again. And I think lessons of my childhood kind of came into it, of like, who are you, right? And what are you going to run towards next? And what are you going to face? And yeah.
Yeah. Is there a day? Because I'd imagine these things don't just happen. It isn't like, they're, I think yesterday, is it TPBN got acquired by OpenAI, and it's like, oh, the news just dropped, or you hear these things. These things are usually 6 to 9 months in the making at least. So there's an acquisition or things are going to be sold. Is there a day after all the paper is signed, you hand over the key? Is there a day that's vivid in your mind? Like it could be sitting on the couch. You're like, wow.
Yeah.
I'd love for you to describe that day, or that where were you, if that comes to mind.
Yeah, I can absolutely describe it. I had a vacation planned um, uh, to Paris and France, and I was trying to close the acquisition or before that, and I missed the deadline, and I, still had this vacation planned, and went on this vacation, and I pushed off a lot of different things, and it wasn't a vacation. I was working the whole time that I was there. My wife can contest, and I think the last weekend, so the Friday, before we left on the Sunday, we finally did a all hands on deck announcement, and the acquirer, spoke to the whole company, and that was the last step in the process. And I remember it vividly, and I don't think I'll ever forget it, because I got off of that call, and it was, letting everybody know what had transpired here, and we'd be moving over to this company. And I turned to my wife and I said, I did it. And I cried. And there was a lot of emotion in that, because truthfully, it's a very, very long story and intricate, but there's many points where it didn't look like it was going to happen. And we had to reset the negotiations. When I became the CEO, I almost had to walk away from the deal to actually bring the deal back to surface and get it to a place. And it was a lot. I think any founder I tell, who's building a company, I'm like, that's the easy part. Selling a company 10 times harder than building a company, right? Finding that exit outcome. And especially a company like Instapage that had been around for over a decade, and had a lot of complexities to it. So I'll always remember that, because deep in my heart, I knew that I was meant to be the person that was going to get it over the finish line. And there's a really famous Jim Rohn quote that says, It's not so much the outcome that matters, it's who you become in the process.
Yeah, yeah,
And who I became in the process was a very, very different version of me. And that version of me is more valuable than, any amount of money I could have earned, because it made me who I am. I know what I'm capable of doing, and I know how far I can push it,
yeah.
to get outcomes like that.
Yeah, that's that's amazing. That's sort of one of our underlining tones here at the Soul Session podcast. And my brand is like who you are is more important than what you achieve, in a lot of different sense. There is this thread that's coming up when you're 10 to now, and it's this idea that you've been able to tap into something deep within you. How does that show up today for folks who don't know? You're now leading, you're back leading again, smaller company, you've started your own. And I'd imagine, I always think about it where it's, I don't know how religious, but this is all the thing that comes to me in Genesis, where it says like you stand in the face of the deep, and and God says, "Let there be light." Like that's what startups feels like for me. It's just nothing. You start at nothing, and you have to create some structure. As you're shown, how does those stories and the lessons from those stories show up in the leader that you are today? I'm curious.
Yeah, I first and foremost, I think the founder at Instapage, he's still a very, very good friend of mine, Tyson Quick. I learned a ton from him. And it's funny because I spent so much time hearing him talk about his start and the early days. But you never really feel it until you do it yourself. And even Hatchproof, Hatchproof, the genesis for Hatchproof really started at Instapage, and I saw what misalignment looked like inside of the organization. I thought the solution was actually like fixing hiring and the way we show up to work and connect at work, but truthfully it became more of a performance story and surfacing those signals and helping that lead to intelligence. But I think overwhelmingly I tend to run towards things that scare me, Damon, and I find that I grow the most in that uncomfortable area, and this felt like the scariest thing I could ever do. Right? There was a lot more comfortable paths I could have taken in my career, but I knew whether I succeed or fail, I'd get the most learning outcome out of this one. And there's something really magical and different about selling and standing behind something you believe in. I've sold millions and millions and millions of dollars worth of stuff that wasn't something I built. It belonged to Oracle or Eloqua or Instapage, and I, still successfully was able to tell that story. And there's just this different feeling when the story is yours,
Yeah.
right? And when the story, I probably it's like how authors feel about reading their own book versus reading every other book, right?
Yeah.
There's a different feeling with it, and being a startup founder is very difficult, very difficult, um, very difficult. It is peaks and valleys, and most of the times it's valleys.
Yeah.
And again, I think if you're not sure of who you are and what you are made of, it will break you. And I've seen it break people that I thought were immensely talented, very gifted, and unfortunately it's not just the best idea that wins. It's execution. There's just so much that goes into it.
Yeah. There's two things as we wrap up. Well, there's three things. The first was just as I'm hearing you talk, the first thing is around building a muscle. And I don't know if you were intentional about it, but I think you being in this place is like you've done hard things. And so there's something deep within you that over the years, you've put yourself in scenarios to do the hard thing. And now you can look back on your track record to say, here's what I've accomplished. I know what I'm capable of. And then the second thing is what you're optimizing for and whether or not it's a reason why other people burn out. But some would say they're optimizing for sometimes the wrong thing. Like in your definition of success, you can't lose because as long as you learn, that would be a level of success.
Absolutely. Yeah. I can't fail. And honestly, like I've shared this before. I have amazing parents, right? I was really blessed to be a part of their existence in this life, and um, they made it so that even in failure, they were okay, right? When you have five kids and you're migrating them across continents, and my mom always says no one finger is the same size,
Mhm.
right? They're all unique, but they all come together to make a fest, and that's the way I think about my siblings and stuff. Like none of us are the same, but we're connected in a very amazing way. And my parents always made it that go and try. Like when I was coming to the U.S., my dad was like, go west. Go explore. Right? There's many parents that would have been, why stay here? Be with your family. Stay connected. But my parents have never been that way.
Yeah.
I'm super blessed, and I think the other thing I'll say is like, yes, I've been through a lot of stuff, but I think the real difference is being okay with knowing that I'm going to continue being through stuff.
Yeah.
The truth is, when you get to the top of the mountain, you're just going to look at another mountain and say, I'm going to climb that mountain. There is no mountaintop, right? There is no mountaintop. There is no nirvana. There is no end state. It is just this constant fluid movement. And the faster you can understand that and be at peace with the movement rather than the end point, the more successful I think you can be in life.
Yeah. Well, Imran, I think that wraps it up way nicer than I could have wrapped it up. Thank you so much for being here. Folks, we will link Imran's LinkedIn. Is there any other place you'd want people to connect with you?
LinkedIn is fantastic. Happy to connect with individuals. Check out Hatchproof, and we're trying to change the way we think about performance. Bring this whole idea of like the whole human to work through self-awareness, intelligence, and signaling. Would love for feedback on what we're building.
Yeah, please do. We'll share more about Hatchproof. One of the things I like about it is it's not just a resume. And the thing is, in this world where AI fluency is needed, how do you, often say, like, you see a job description, say, hey, you need 10 years of AI. It's like, that's a joke. So how can we, how can we test for curiosity? How can we, move towards those things? And you're doing it from both sides, because one of the things that I've learned is that, as people stay because of their managers. So what if you could uniquely do that? And that's one of the wonderful things Hatchproof is doing. So, Imran, thanks again. Um,
My pleasure, Damon.